Good afternoon and welcome to our live stream. We're coming to you today live from the offices of The National, where we're going to be having a discussion about, Scotland's relationship with its colonial past, its role in the slave trade, and how as a country kind of come to terms with certain parts of it, or in other ways maybe brushed some parts of that under the carpet. So joining me for this discussion today is Jude Barber, who is an architect and one half of the Empire Cafe, and also Graham Fagen, who is an artist. So thank you both for coming in and joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So I guess just to sort of start very broadly, Scotland did have a role, obviously, within the British Empire. I mean, can you just tell me a little bit about what part Scotland played in that?
Well, I think one of the things that we've sort of been unravelling as part of our kind of investigations in the Empire Cafe project is, as a child, I actually had very little understanding of, and even a young adult, Scotland's role in empire and trading and slavery at all. And I think what we've learned from reading and meeting some incredible historians such as like Stephen Mulland, Tom Devine, Michael Morris, some great historians, and they've really kind of opened our eyes just to how significant actually Scotland's role was in the triangular trade, and particularly in our investigation, particularly through Glasgow. And when you actually start to look into it, I was quite shocked. Like in Jamaica, there are whole towns, villages, and such that called Aberdeen and Edinburgh, and you start to see all these place names and start to realise that actually the role that Scotland had to play in the sort of West Indies and in the triangular trading was hugely significant. And I suppose I'm not a historian myself, but it's been a real kind of journey over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, sort of realising that the role we played was hugely significant.
But that's exactly it. You shouldn't have to be a historian to kind of have a stronger understanding of the role that we played.
Yeah, I suppose my own formal education, there was both primary and secondary, there was only one part that I can sort of specifically remember that addressed the notion or the concept of empire, and it was seeing a map of the world, and we were told or taught that the pink areas of this particular version of the map of the world were the British Empire, and there was quite a lot of pink on that world map. And I suppose that was the extent of my memory of what I was taught formally, and it was a formal representation of perhaps a world order. You weren't told that was a sense of power or your country was an authority over that. There was just this almost by the wayness of everything that's pink on that map belongs to Britain.
And I think one of the things that there's a really brilliant book by the historian Stephen Mulland called It Wasn't Us, and I think the sheer title kind of highlights just how much we all really need to read and learn more about our history so we get that deeper understanding of our role.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, especially in a city like Glasgow. I remember growing up and having curiosities and questions. Why do we have a Jamaica Street? I quite like that name. It's great that we've got a street called Jamaica. And that was as a child, that curiosity was there. And I suppose my frustration, going back to the sense of formal education, is I felt as if I had a kind of parallel education. I had the formal aspect through primary and secondary school, and an informal aspect through what I was learning, what I was finding out for myself away from school. And I kind of grew up with what I describe as an idle curiosity, and it was between, or a question as to why did my cultural heritage that I was taught formally through the songs and poems of Robert Burns not mean very much to me and my peer group, but the cultural polar opposite, Jamaican reggae, that I was buying and that I was going to see, why did that mean so much more, and why were those lyrics so much more meaningful to me and my peer group in our damp, wet, grey west coast of Scotland council housing scheme? And it wasn't until I discovered, again away from formal education, when I was researching for an art project in 2000, I had a chance to research Burns a bit more, and I discovered that he had booked 3 passages to go and live and work in Jamaica, to work as what white polite society were calling a bookkeeper. But if you look at the role of a bookkeeper in Jamaica in 1786, you'll see that his job or his purpose would be to drive slaves on a sugar plantation. So this thing that I understood as an idle curiosity between musical and cultural interests was actually, in fact, a historically linked and connected fact. And it made me have lots of questions that I've tried to use my artwork to address, but it also made me very curious as to why, when being taught about our cultural inheritance, why were certain parts, certain vital parts, left out.
Definitely that image of Robert Burns as a slave owner or slave trader or working on a plantation is definitely not one that we have introduced to us in school.
No,
Not at all.
no.
Not at all.
And there are many uncomfortable truths like that. I mean, for me as an architect, coming to Glasgow sort of 15 years ago, wandering around the streets, and we were talking about this earlier, like wandering around the streets and, marveling at all this gorgeous architecture, beautiful stonework, palatial buildings at times, and then sort of thinking, as you get more experience as an architect, thinking, gosh, that would have cost, millions at a time, equivalent to millions and millions of pounds, thinking, where did all that money come from? How did Glasgow, how did these people, these singular families like the Cunninghams, which is now the Gallery of Modern Art, was a family mansion, in a huge, our whole merchant city is built up around, these decisions that singular families made about how to display their wealth in sort of Scotland at that kind of, 1800s. And you start to think, well, you start to ask yourself some hard questions about, Scotland and how we did generate this incredible wealth and how cities grew so quickly and so abundantly at a very particular period.
But I mean, exactly, it's those questions that Rasp are like, not where that wealth went, and like you say, exactly, you can see it here, and you can also see Scotland's role in other countries. Again, as you're saying about, in Jamaica, places called Edinburgh and everything else. But despite that being quite, at the forefront of what we can see, at the same time, do you still think it's a little bit of a free pass sometimes? Because when people talk about empire, they don't tend to talk about Scotland's role in it. It's usually kind of more framed of like the British Empire really being England's role within it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a sort of convenient sort of sidestep for a lot of us. And I wonder, Tom Devine talks about collective amnesia, willful forgetting, all those sort of, we're maybe more comfortable with the notion that we were the downtrodden, to do this and we're made to do that. And I think, what these historians are telling us is that, this is entirely the opposite. Scots were chosen specifically to go out because they were so harsh in the plantations, they were sought after, that people went out in droves. And actually, an interesting fact that we heard listening to Billy Kay's Black History Month series that just was replayed recently, which is fantastic, that actually things like, the first Gaelic dictionary was funded, 60% of it was funded from wealth, from the West Indies and things. So actually, you start to see a story here about a very significant and dedicated role, and a clear awareness actually about, what was going on at the time. And I think, we also have to mention that Scotland did have a kind of significant role in the abolitionist movement and such like, but, as you say, it's whether we talk about it, how we talk about it, I think is important. And finding the language, the language to talk about it and the forums to talk about it is again hugely important. So I mean, that's something that, for us, that's what the Empire Cafe was really all about, was bringing together people like, like Graham, Tom Devine, Steve, and great writers like James Robertson, such like who have been working in this field, who have been investigating these topics together in a sort of convivial forum, so that people can ask quite frankly, can you explain that to me again? I don't quite, can we try and unpick this a little bit and think about how we go forward and how we address it?
And that term, that collective amnesia, is something that I'm very uncomfortable with. And for me, a bit like the questions that I found for myself when I was describing, I suppose, my formal education, that term or that concept of collective amnesia just makes me ask very similar questions. It makes me want to know, was there amnesia? Was there not amnesia? How conscious was it that we didn't address and talk about this history? How unconscious was it? Why wasn't there academic research, serious academic research happening on this subject until the last decade or so? Where was it? Where was that serious academic research? Where were the historians? Because this is a history from the 1700s. This is a history that started from the Act of Union. And surely we're not saying that we've just realised that history is round about us. We're surrounded by it.
But I think it's the framing of that, though, because one of the things that came up we had a debate as part of the Merchant City Festival, a discussion as part of the Merchant City Festival 2 or 3 weeks ago, here in Glasgow at the City Halls, which was very fitting kind of venue for it. And one of the things that came up about the museums and national museums particularly are established to sort of tell the story about a nation and that sort of civic kind of identity. And so many of our national museums were established, at the kind of height of empire and the sort of imperialist project. So that's the story. So it's about kind of reframing. I think that was a really wonderful conversation we had as part of that debate, was that, it was how do you reframe those stories and how do you reframe that history so that we are actually seeing it from all those alternative perspectives, so we're not just seeing it from one direction, which is how many of us have been educated about our history and our role in the empire.
Yeah, well, maybe picking up on the national museums and national galleries, maybe I should plug myself.
Yeah, because you've got a piece of work at the moment.
Plug work, more importantly. At the moment at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, I have an exhibition of 3 works that are on display there. One work is called The Slaves Lament, and it's a reworking of the song that's Robert Burns published in 1792 called The Slaves Lament. And I've remade that work in 2015 when I was invited to represent Scotland at the Venice Biennale in Italy. And I remade the 1792 version of The Slaves Lament. I've made a few versions of it. The first version of it I made was in about 2004, and I worked with Adrian Sherwood, Skip MacDonald, the musician, and the vocalist Ghetto Priest, the reggae vocalist Ghetto Priest. And I suppose that the kind of reason I wanted to remake that song was to find out about what that song might mean today, something that was written in 1792, probably as part of a kind of broader abolition movement, and the song was perhaps used to raise awareness of what was going on between the UK or Britain and the Indies and the Americas as well at that time. But also, what would it mean today? What does it mean today? But also, I talked about my cultural polar opposite meaning more to me than my cultural heritage, Robert Burns, when I was growing up. And I felt that I had to kind of reach out to that cultural polar opposite. I had to have conversations with people who were from that perceived cultural polar opposite. So that's why I thought conversations with people like Ghetto Priest about that song, and to see or to hear their views and their thoughts on that song and what it refers to and the history it refers to, in order to see if they would be willing to work with me in order to collaborate to make a version of that song now. And to cut a long story short, there's a new version of the Slaves Lament that we made for Venice in 2005, which is on at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery from now until the end of October, and for that I worked with the composer Sally Beamish and the Scottish Ensemble, and we worked with Adrian Sherwood and Skip MacDonald and Ghetto Priest again, almost in a kind of culture clash, if you like, to kind of, I suppose, address perhaps the kind of empathy and the humanity that's round about that song that Burns first published in 1792.
And obviously one of the things we're discussing is the fact that, you know, we are having these like discussions now where there's this work, you know, like in a big institution in Scotland, but up until the last decade, like you say, this isn't a discussion we've been having. I mean, why is it that we're only now starting to kind of coming around to actually having this conversation, and our culture's only starting to really reflect that conversation as well?
I think there's probably a number of, I mean, again, I could say one thing particularly, but I know for myself, there's been, you know, as a generation, we've been sort of travelling more around the world. There's more opportunity to access information beyond established institutions, to cross boundaries, you know, music and media and all of these things. And I think one of the things that I loved most about when we were doing the Empire Cafe was, you know, we were working with some, worked with the British Council, some poets came over from you know, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, and it was incredible because you'd have these stories about what a big part of the event was making food. There was a huge food program and exchanging stories, and you know, so you were having like sort of poets from, say, Trinidad talking to sort of Scottish cafe owners, kind of talking about making fudge with their grannies, you know, and there was that kind of shared cultural identity, actually, and you know, we talk so much about, you know, for us the reason it's called the Empire Cafe, the project, is because it was sort of conceived during the Commonwealth Games, and that being based in Glasgow, and you know, the Commonwealth Games were formerly called the British Empire Games, and hence the sort of the Empire Cafe, and for us, you know, what was so important for that was about sort of, you know, when I was brought up in the Commonwealth, to me, we're like thinking about, you know, Australia, Canada, you know, your sort of cousins were considered, your cousins and family, we're all considered in those sorts of countries, and then suddenly to think, actually, no, we have these huge cultural connections. Our cousins are actually the Caribbean and Africa. You know, Scottish identity is much, much broader and much, much richer than I realised, and I think that for me has been particularly at a time, and has never been more important to be talking about that, actually, in our sort of current political climate, I think.
It's a real frustration for me, and it's a question that I share with you. You know, why are we starting to talk about it now? And I can only imagine that the reasons we haven't talked about it before is because the structure of our society benefited greatly from the slave trade, from the mass wealth that was achieved from that industry, and also the wealth that was achieved by estate owners when slavery was abolished, who were paid, I think, billions in today's money in compensation for the loss of their slaves. The University of Central London has got a fantastic website that you can reference for free, and you can find out who benefited from those compensation payments. And it's intriguing to have a look at it, because you find out that the spine of power today can be traced back to this period and to this time, and so that gives you clues as to why there was a possible amnesia on this subject area. But maybe just as importantly, I think it's great that we're talking about this subject matter now. It's way overdue, but we are talking about it now. And I started research in this area in about the year 2000, and I struggled to find peers who were working in the same area. I found James Robertson in about 2004 when he published his book on Joseph Knight. And I'd gone from a frustration in about the year 2000 to being part of a public forum at the Empire Cafe in 2014. So in a fairly short amount of time, a frustration about not having other people to chat with or to 14 years further on, there was that public forum happening that coincided with Glasgow hosting the Commonwealth Games. You know, it was great to see and to be part of that public forum that was the Empire Cafe, that was publicly addressing Scotland's role in the transatlantic slave trade. So I think we should, of course, ask questions about why it's taken us so long to talk about it, but also champion and celebrate the fact that there's a growing who are talking about it publicly, and there's now serious academic research working on it as well.
Support that. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, for us, the Empire Cafe, I mean, one of the things we had when we received the funding for the project, you have to fill in all these kind of what are the risks and blah blah. One of the risks was people might not engage with the subject, or they might find it unpalatable, they might find it awkward, they might not. And actually, what we found was it was quite the opposite. 4,000 people came. That didn't count, stuff we did at the book festival or the radio stuff. So you suddenly realised there was a big appetite to come to a cafe and to engage with the subject on whichever way you saw fit. And I do agree with entirely what Graham's saying, is that the level to which this period in our history kind of permeates all aspects of society is still very, very strong. And Andy Whiteman came in at an event called Land and Empire and just absolutely laid it on the table. The way in which again Scotland's land, Scotland's the buildings, the property, legal system, everything is so driven and kind of shrouded in this kind of period in our history.
So yeah, I guess that's a question then, when you sort of touched on there as well, like, can we use culture and art to, I guess, discuss the empire, but also to draw attention to the power structures that exist today, that are almost still in place from that period of time, and use that to highlight what's still in place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I pretty much see my role or my job as an artist is to, what I'm interested in is what I've been describing as cultural formers and forms. So as an artist, I'm intrigued by the things that shape our culture and how in turn that shapes us. And once you have an awareness of who you are culturally, you're able to then compare and contrast and share your understandings and your knowledge through your culture with other cultures. And for me, that's a fundamental part of my job as an artist, or my role as an artist. And maybe within that, there's space or place maybe to ask these types of awkward questions, and maybe to perhaps find the language to maybe address these awkward questions. Because I know we were talking about language and the how do you express something? What words do you use to try and communicate and to try and share? Maybe if you're able to do things in song or through music or through lyric or through prints or sculptures, then maybe that can take away that awkwardness that perhaps comes with a language.
Absolutely, and again we found that with the food programme, at the Empire Cafe, just talking about, the way in which you make food and share food, and then things like macaroons, and it's coconut. I ate macaroons as a kid. This is coconut. Ginger and all these ginger biscuits and everything can be so traced back to that period of history and the trading that was going on at the time. And for us, what a big part of the Empire Cafe was the poetry collection. There were commissioned 20 poems, 10 and 10 Caribbean-based poets. And I think when the poets read their work on stage at the event, it just sort of unravelled. You could have. It was fantastic hearing all the academics and the historians as well. The poet stand up and just succinctly kind of bring together aspect of this history that was sort of, the facts necessarily, it was sort of something human about it, that everyone was able to kind of relate to the subject matter more closely and sort of be put at ease to a degree by the fact that it was being articulated in a way that was so nuanced and so carefully presented. And we could all sort of take some comfort to a degree in that, but and sort of manage the anger and find some sort of collective way to discuss the subjects. So yeah, I think the role that that art and culture and could play in this conversation, I think, is fundamental.
Because, I mean, obviously the last couple of days in America, the events there have been obviously very taut and quite worrying. But a lot of this conversation, or at least some of the reasons being said for this conversation happening, is because of the discussion of taking down statues of people who were involved in the Civil War, generally arguing in favour of slavery. I mean, we have statues here. We have our own history of people who have, you know, morally equitable politics. But we're not tearing down statues just now. I mean, well, what do you think is the right way? We should almost be dealing with that history. Like, should we be tearing down the statues, or should we be looking at other ways to address that history?
Well, I mean, we actually talked about this at some length as part of our conversation at the Merchant City Festival, and it was Robert Soam and Adele Patrick from his library, and they were, you know, we had this really quite interesting conversation with the audience, and people were, the general feeling, and I sort of agree with this, is that actually it's not to, by removing that part, by visually removing these items, you're all sort of erasing part of that history. And I think that the general feeling that came out, there's some fantastic suggestions, you know, about painting statues' faces red, and, you know, handcuffing them and things like that, and you know, putting layering those up with with those other histories, you know, about people who campaigned, you know, against, you know, slavery, you know, celebrating other characters, rather than removing what was already there. So it was almost like a kind of shaming rather than removing, was something that was discussed. And again, I think for me as an architect, I mean, architecture is a display of society's values at any one time, and you'd have to just take away the whole merchants. You'd almost have to take away, because the structure of the merchant city is inherently based on that epoch. So I think for me, taking things away isn't necessarily the answer. It's more just looking at them with a completely, I mean, I can't unsee now I mean, Nick Barley from the Book Festival talked about like blood in the mortar. You know, I can't not see that now in buildings from that period, in the architects that worked for those slave owners at the time. So, you know, I think by having them there, by having those buildings there, and remembering and discussing why they're there, you learn a lot actually about your current times and how you might address some of those challenges today. And we're quite heartened because Louise Welsh, sort of co-creator of the Empire Cafe with myself, did a project before the Empire Cafe called Merchant City Voices, and that was a kind of soundscape project. It was temporary, but we still have the videos, and now, you know, we've found that the Gallery of Modern Art are now using that with schools, and they're going around the Merchant City and they're playing the little Vimeo clips and listening to those and telling that. So that, you know, I think, and Stephen Mullen does that with his walking tours, so in his library do that with their alternative history tours. So I think, yeah, removal for me, I can understand absolutely the toppling statues, the symbolism of that, the anger. I completely understand that, but I think there's an opportunity, I think, in Scotland to do something broader and more encompassing and more honest, really, and frank about these histories.
I suppose as an artist, I would be chuffed if people walking past sculptures knew what they were sculptures of. I'm sure the majority of people walk past a lot of these famous men, white men, merchants now, and have got no clue as to who they are or what role or what job they had in the past. And maybe maybe in a sense that's a good thing, because I suppose the reason, in contrast to the southern states at the moment, I suppose the reason that there's tension there at the moment is because people know exactly who some of these sculptures are of, and of course they relate to that whole Civil War history of the South wanting to retain slavery, with the North wanting to abolish slavery, and these sculptures are sculptures of the generals who wanted to retain slavery. So they're probably much more known than the statues we have, say, of maybe Dundas through in Edinburgh, and Dundas single-handedly delayed the abolition of slavery for political reasons as well. But I think in general, I agree with what Jude's saying about, if we take them away, we're taking away part of our history. But if they're kept there and people know the history, then that's keeping our history there, and it's keeping that awareness and that knowledge alive, and it certainly goes against that poor concept of amnesia as well.
And again, it's tied in with education and schools and learning, and not just children, adults like myself. And one of the interesting sort of subjects that came up as well was our event was, about making space around these, which interested me as an architect, that you would alter the space around these monuments or the roads or the public areas or the merchants' houses, that you would somehow modify them to shift, to literally shift the perspective. So I think there could be some really quite innovative ways to start that kind of frank conversation.
Yeah, and I've had very early conversations with the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, with my work being there at the moment. I've had some very early conversations with them about their collection and the people that may be in their collection as well. So hopefully that's an idea or a possibility that I can keep a conversation going with them, and maybe that's a project that could be looked at into the future as well.
And do you think that since the UK at the moment is obviously looking at Brexit, we're leaving the European Union, or we're supposed to be leaving the European Union, we'll see how that goes over the next couple of years, this is an ideal time to be having a frank conversation about our connection with the rest of the world. Like this sort of conversation is actually relevant right now and something we should be discussing.
I think we should always be talking about our connections and our relevance and our shared humanity with the rest of the world. It's not. The frustrating thing about Brexit is, it's not just about trade. It's about far more than that. It's about the humanity that's been affected or will be affected by it. But much more broadly and much more generally, I talked about understanding your culture in order to share and communicate with other cultures, and maybe not just with Brexit, but maybe with North Korea and Mr. Trump. Conversations need to be happening. That shared sense of humanity and culture exchange is vital, not just now, but all the time.
Yeah. And there's a danger that it sort of peaks and troughs, in a sense, for the sort of political situations that might be happening at any one time. I think what we've learned from it's just so pervasive through our whole, regardless of the political machinations that are happening at any particular one time. This is a conversation that needs to happen, regardless of who's in power, regardless of where the boundaries lie. It's essential if we're going to have that kind of deeper understanding of our own historical journey.
Great. Well, that's to bring us, I guess, to the end of this conversation. I guess my final thing I'd like to ask then is, where do you see that conversation going?
For me, I think we've, since we did the Empire Cafe in 2014, it's been quite interesting watching the conversations ebb and flow. For me, we would just, myself and Louise, we were talking about this just now, we just feel that we would just like to see much more energy and activity going into this conversation, and really that, when we did the event in 2014, the Glasgow Museums, committed to addressing this issue in a really sort of proactive, head-on kind of way. It's really worth going around the museums actually and looking at the information that is currently on display. And really, we would sort of suggest a sort of more radical approach to how we present our histories and how museums sort of operate and share the collection and discuss the collections, and that they don't necessarily have to happen, in four walls. And I know that is happening to an extent, but it would just be so wonderful to see that ramped up, at national level, not just at the sort of Glasgow level.
Yeah, and I suppose personally for me, or with the work that I've been making, it's been hugely supported by the British Council, and the British Council have helped me take the work, the Slaves Lament, to the Americas. So it's been in different places in Canada. It's still got other museums to go to in Canada. I've also taken it to Barbados. I've taken it to Trinidad, where the work has been shown and there's been public debate and conversation. So I guess it's me bringing my connection to that history and sharing that story with the people at the opposite point of the triangle from me, and trying to have productive and creative conversations about the role that certainly Scotland's had, but also that point that I've been making about, what does that history mean today? Where are we today with that type of thing? And next month, the National Gallery of Jamaica, Kingston, I'll be exhibiting the Slaves Lament there in a group exhibition with other artists from Jamaica as well. So it's taken my kind of Scottish cultural context and sharing it with the context of cultures from the Caribbean as well.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for coming in and joining me today to discuss Scotland's relationship with the British Empire and the role played in it. Just final thing then, if anybody wants to find out more about the Empire Cafe, where can they go?
www.empirecafe.org, I think.
And is there any more events coming up?
We are planning some events. They're in the pipeline. So we've got a Twitter handle at Empire Cafe 1, I think. But if you type in Empire Cafe, it should come up. There's also a cafe in the States called Empire Cafe, so don't get confused.
Don't get confused. And if people want to find your work?
Yeah, Scottish National Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh. It's right in the city, part of the Old Town, and the exhibition's on until October 29, I think, and it's completely free.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank
you to everyone who tuned in and left a comment as well. If you are coming in right at the very end, as I can see a couple of you are, don't worry, you will be able to watch and listen to the entire conversation in a very short while. Just keep an eye on our social media and thenational.scot, where you'll be able to view it. But thank you very much, and keep an eye on our social media for future live streams, including Blether Together this Thursday, where we'll be discussing all the news of the week up until then. Thanks very much. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.